So we'll start here. So we finished this up on Friday. I believe we did this problem, but this here is dealing with the midpoint formula. And the midpoint formula is x1 plus x2 divided by 2, comma, y1 plus y2 divided by 2 is our midpoint formula. And if we take the x values of the midpoint and add them together and divide by 2, we'll get the x value of the midpoint. If we take the y values of the two endpoints, add them together and divide by 2, we get the y value of the midpoint. And using this formula, we'll be able to get what the value of the midpoint is. And what we started off doing with this here is that we just plugged the x values in divided by 2, plugged the y values in divided by 2, simplified it down and got the midpoint. And where we finished the lesson off with is a problem like this here. The midpoint of line VW is -1, 2. They didn't give us both endpoints. They gave us the midpoint and an endpoint, and they want us to find the other endpoint. And our one endpoint, they told us, is 4, 4. Find the coordinates of the endpoint V. Well, from what we know is that if I plug the two x values of the endpoints and divide it by 2, I would get the x value of the midpoint. Well, what is the x value of the midpoint? -1. They told us what the midpoint is for the x value and y value already. So that also means that y1 plus y2 divided by 2 is -2. They told us what these two equations would equal, but they didn't give us both of the endpoints, both of the x values and the y values. So if I'm looking at this here, well, I know one of the endpoints is 4, but since I don't know what the other one is, I'll just call it x. For y, we'll have 4 plus y divided by 2 is equal to -2. So we're just plugging in those values for their given spots. Any questions on this so far? So we'll solve for x first. Value of x first. What do we need to do first? Multiply both sides by 2. Because our 2 and 2 here will cancel, leaving us with 4 plus x is equal to -2. -1 times 2 would be -2. And last but not least, to solve for the value of x, we would subtract 4 from both sides. This 4 minus 4 is 0, leaving us with just x is equal to -6. So the x value of the midpoint or endpoint is -6. So the other endpoint would be -6 for x. I believe we're looking for V. So endpoint V is going to be 6, comma, some other number. So let's solve for the value of y. Well, what do we need to do first? Multiply both sides by 2. And when we're solving for an endpoint, when we're given the midpoint already and an endpoint, really that first step is going to be multiplying by 2. So we multiply both sides by 2. On one side we get 4 plus y. The other side, -2 times 2, would give us -4. What would we do next? Yes. 4 minus 4 is 0, which leaves us with y is equal to -8. So this here should have been -6 and -8. So our other endpoint V will be at the point -6, -8. And that's it. That's all we have to do for this here. Questions on any of this here? So with midpoint, the midpoint formula, either one is really we plug in what we know and then solve for what we don't. Because if I'm given the two endpoints, it's just plug in the x's, plug in the y's, simplify, simplify, we're done. If I'm given a midpoint and an endpoint, we still plug in, but I have a few more steps I have to do to solve. Any questions on any of this here? Okay. Let's look at this here, distance formula. I believe we started this on Friday because I have a vague memory of, I talked and delved into the fact that this comes from the Pythagorean theorem, and we can use it to find it. But let's actually look at it in practice. Your school is 4 miles east and 1 mile south of your apartment. A recycling center where your class is going on a field trip is 2 miles east and 3 miles north of your apartment. Estimate the distance between the recycling center and your school. Now, what they don't explicitly say is that your school, or not your school, your apartment is going to be considered the origin because we're referencing everything from there. So the school is 4 miles east and 1 mile south. Well, north, south, east, west. So east, 4 miles east and 1 mile south. So we're really at the point 4, -1. That's our 1 point. Now the recycling center is 2 miles east and 3 miles north of your apartment. So we're looking at these 2 points here, and we want to find the distance from one to the other. We're just wanting to find the distance between those 2 points. Well, our distance formula is equal to the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. So what are our 2 x values? 2 and 4. Now the order in which we plug them in really doesn't matter. And our y values are 3 and -1. Now at this point here, if you wanted to type this entire thing into the calculator, by all means, go ahead and do it. Because all of this here, everything in here is a number. There's no variables, nothing we have to solve for, so we could type this entire thing in and get the answer. Now if we did this by hand, 2 minus 4 would be -2. 3 minus -1, well, a negative and negative make a. So 3 plus 1 is 4. Well, -2 squared is 4. And 4 squared is 4 plus 16 is. Well, on this point here, we just need to take the square root of 20. Now, is 20 a perfect square? No, there's not 2 numbers that'll multiply together to give me 20. So if we wanted to type this in, we could type it in, and it would tell us that this here is, does anybody know? Well, it does have 4, right? 4 times 5 is 20. can I take the square root of 4? What's the square root of 4? 2. So we can pull that out, and I'd be left with the square root of 5. Or, if we put this as a decimal, it's 4.472135, this whole decimal, or that. I will take either version of the number. I will take either the decimal or the radical. The only time I would prefer or mark one of those wrong is if I ask for it round just to the nearest decimal number, then we'll want it as a decimal. If it says, or I ask for it to be in simplest radical form, we're looking for 2 square root of 5. But if I don't say, I will take either one. Questions on this here? We good with this here? Okay, there we go. In example 4, a park is 3 miles east and 4 miles south of your apartment. Find the distance between the park and your school. So our school is 4 miles east and 1 mile south. So 4 miles east and 1 mile south. So our point 4, -1 is where the school is at, and that's just from the given problem, our previous problem. But now what we want to find is a park that is 3 miles east and 4 miles south. So 3, -4. And when you're solving these here, I'm not expecting you to rewrite b is equal to the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. If that helps you kind of keep track of the formula, do it. If you don't need it, you don't have to do it. So what are our x values for this here? 4 and 3, yes? So I said earlier that the order of which we put these in doesn't matter, because we're going to be subtracting them, yes? What is 4 minus 3? What is 3 minus 4? -1, right? But what do? We square it, right? So +1 squared would be +1. -1 squared would be +1, yes? So the difference in sign is accounted for because of the square. The only one where this really matters is in the slope formula, because it's y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. There is no squares. There's no way to account for that negative if it does come up. So we have to keep those in the correct order. But here, because of that square, it really doesn't matter. So we can say 4 minus 3. Our y2 and y1 is -1 and -4. So I can put -1 minus -4 squared. Well, as we already said, 4 minus 3 is 1. Well, here a negative and negative make a positive. -1 plus 4 is 3. Now, we already said that 1 squared is going to be 1. What is 3 squared? 9. And 1 plus 9 is the square root of 10. Can we take the square root of 10? No, there's not two numbers that multiply together to give me 10. Does 10 have any common factors that are perfect squares? Because 1 is a perfect square, 1 times 1. 4 is because it's 2 times 2. After 4 would be 9, 3 times 3, and then the one after that is 16. Well, none of those are factors because only factors of 10 are 1 and 10 and 2 and 5. So none of those are perfect squares. So that is the correct answer. And the decimal number would be 3.1 possibly. It's most likely going to be close to 3.0 would be the answer. Does anybody know how I came up with 3? So what are perfect squares? Because we just had them 1, 4, and then what? 9, 16, yes? 9 is 3 times 3. 9 is close to 10. So the square root of 10 should be close to 3. So we can get that range. So if you're doing square roots by hand, that's really what you fall down to, or fall to is that. And then, okay, so 3 is close, really close to 9, so I'll try 3.1 times 3.1. Okay, that's too big. I'll drop down to 3.0. And then it's just a lot of multiplication. Any questions on any of this here? Do we feel good with this here? And that's it. That is all we're doing for today.